time zone, the absent state, end of the line, the story of the killing of the royals in Nepal, and 173 hours in captivity. Known for his radio show, Yadav Ka Idiot Box with Neelesh Mishra, Big FM 92.7, he is also co-founder editor of Gaon Connection, India's rural newspaper. He has founded the content creation company, Content Project. G. Sampath is a columnist with Live Mint and the author of How to Make Enemies and Offend People, a collection of non-fiction humor. His satirical columns have appeared in DNA, Mint, and First Post. He was formerly deputy editor, DNA, and also the newspaper's books editor for 7 years. Thank you. Over to the panelists.
Is this audible? Okay. Check. Okay, good morning everyone. So we are here to unravel the secrets of travel writing. We have a distinguished panel here. And before we get to the panelists, I thought I will unravel a couple of secrets myself and set the ball rolling. So travel writing basically has two primary elements. One is traveling, the other is writing. So these are something which is anybody can do, and people are doing as well. A lot of people travel for various purposes. We are basically a migratory species now. We travel for work, we travel for visit relatives, we travel for an emergency to some place, whatever. And we also do a lot of writing, even speech has taken the form of writing, you do it, you speak to each other by typing on screens, so everybody is a writer as well. So travel writing is something which a lot of people want to do because it also has an element of glamour attached to it. And you want to go and see different places, and over the years travel writing has evolved in many ways. It began with, it really took off, even though the ancient Greeks have written about climbing mountains in Rome and all that. It actually took off with the age of colonialism, and explorers and military adventurers began writing about it. And from a point of time where the point of travel writing was to tell people what they have not seen, we have reached a stage where you're going to be telling people what they see every day, through travel shows, travel blogs, Lonely Planet. I mean, it's very difficult to think of a place on the planet which is lonely, because there's already somebody who's gone and written about it already. So what does a travel writer do, and how do you make your writing about a particular place interesting, different, something which people would want to read about, even though they may have gone and seen that place for themselves? So these are some of the questions we'll be discussing today, and I'd like to begin by asking Suli something which is probably close to my heart also. She calls herself a traveler with no sense of direction, and that could be the story of my life as well. In fact, if I were to write an autobiography, I would call it a traveler with no sense of direction. So Suli, how do you, if you don't have a sense of direction, how do you get to wherever you're headed? Most people would like to sort of have some kind of arrangements formally in place for their traveling and living and boarding and food, some sort of plan out a little bit, but you basically don't know where you're headed, and that seems to be like at the heart of your approach to travel writing. So can you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think it started off that way. It wasn't really a choice, but then when after some time of doing that, and I found that there was a lot to be enjoyed by traveling that way. So now it has become the story of my life. The reason I say that I was forced into it, literally, carted off with my arms flying around, was when I was about 5 or 6, because my father was in the Air Force, So we traveled every 2 years. We moved every 2 years. And as a child, you develop some kind of stability, some friends, and then you have to move every 2 years. So it wasn't really a choice to begin with. But that means that I began to love meeting strangers, knowing that I'm not going to know them for long. And then every time I leave a place, I miss it, but not too much. I move on after a few days. So, of all the places that I've traveled to, I think it's very important to not really know where you're going, because you end up seeing a lot more. And in the case of my favorite country, which is India, I think there is no other way to travel. I think most of you would agree, right? India has no respect for your plans, and yeah, and I like it that way, because I absorb a lot more of what happens around me than if I had a plan to say head straight for the Taj Mahal and to learn about how many jewels there are and all that. I really don't know how many jewels there are. But what I do know is what happens around the Taj Mahal, the life that happens around, which incidentally includes peacocks and dogs and cows and pigs and, you know, and birds. And when I come to India, I see this very perfectly choreographed dance, which also has no sense of direction, but it happens perfectly. It's perfect chaos.
Can I add something on this?
Yeah, sure.
I sort of envy you when you say that you don't have any sense of the direction, because I have a true evolved sense of direction, and I find that is sometimes really difficult when you're a travel writer. You know exactly where north is, and you know exactly where you're supposed to go, because then you miss out on all those many chance things that might happen to you. So over the years, as a travel writer, I've tried to develop different methods to make myself lose my sense of direction. So like when I go in a particular bazaar part of town, I try to keep turning, you know, as much as possible until I don't know where I am, and until I'm really lost, and then try to find my way out of it. And I often have many chance encounters in that way. So I think one should not underestimate the importance of lack of sense of direction for good travel writing.
But I think there might be something too much of lacking a sense of direction. Like for example, I get lost going from Delhi to Noida, you know, because my sense of direction is very poor. It could become like a huge travel adventure which nobody's interested in reading about, because nobody wants to read about a travelogue set in Noida, you know, or Gurgaon or whatever.
But why not? Why not a travelogue about you losing your way to work? I mean, sounds like a splendid idea for a book.
I think I might go into some other kind of genre, maybe not travel writing, because maybe commute writing, you know, that might be a new genre, sub-genre of travel writing maybe.
Or a kind of philosophical travelogue about the importance of lack of sense of direction.
Yeah, but then that I can write sitting in my couch, you know, I don't have to travel anywhere. So I can do a philosophical travelogue just watching TV and that's
yeah,
also,
but
I think,
you mentioned Noida, which is coincidental. I planned, I had a loose plan to travel around India in 2.5 months. I took about 3 months off, and I planned to travel around India in that 3 months. But I ended up in Noida for 3 months.
Wow.
And
I'm looking forward to that book.
And I did no traveling except for 1 week in Bhubaneswar and certain areas in Orissa. So.
Okay, Noida has sort of gone up in my list of places to visit. I live 1 kilometer from Noida, so it shouldn't be a big commute or travel for me. So that's it. And moving, one of the aspects of travel writing which really interests me is the differences in approach of different travel writers. If Suli prefers heading out with no sense of direction, Neelesh, I think, by virtue of what he has done for so many years in journalism, needs to know exactly where he wants to go and needs to be there on time and do what he needs to do there within a specified deadline so that he can get on to the next thing. So his approach to travel would be, I think, very different. And I was reminded of one small anecdote which sort of gives a glimpse into the kind of thinking which goes into the kind of travel Neelesh does. He has traveled in the hinterlands in conflicted, in areas of conflict, Naxal zones, and he's written about it with a great deal of detail and so on. And I was talking to another writer who has done a similar kind of travel book, Sundeep Chakravarti, the other day, and he was telling, and we were discussing what kind of travel gear would be ideal, you know, when you're traveling in parts where it's not easy to charge your laptop or phone or so on. You might be traveling for many days without electricity connections. So he was, somebody mentioned a rucksack with a solar panel on it, so it automatically charges your laptop and iPhones and all because of solar panels. But he said, if you're traveling in a conflict area with that solar panel rucksack, it will reflect light and you might get shot, you know. So that kind of an idea would never occur to me if I was going to buy, or maybe Suli was going to buy a solar panel rucksack. But someone like Neelesh or Sundeep, I think this kind of thinking is automatic to them. So I wanted to talk about, you know, how you prepare and, you know, how you approach your kind of writing.
You know, I have, and you reminded me actually of a lot of old journeys. So I was covering the Kargil war for 2 months when we had a satellite phone which was banned, may I add. So the moment you flipped it out, you were mindful of, you know, where we were, because we were in the border area, and we were in Siachen, in a hotel which had recently been bombed, and every morning we set out to this place called Mashko Valley on National Highway 1, where there was shelling coming in from the Pakistani side, and there was this very treacherous balance that the car had to make, because we passed stretches, at least a stretch of 2 kilometers, where the Pakistani guns were like a kilometer away, anti-aircraft guns. And I think that's the first time when a lot of us, then young journalists, were thrown into the deep end of the swimming pool, so to say. A lot of us didn't realize that it was life-threatening. I've traveled extensively in Kashmir for a lot of my journalism work, and I used to always, say with some amount of irony that I want to come to Kashmir as a tourist and not as a journalist, because I can never sit and enjoy a sunset, or write one of the Bollywood songs I've been writing for the last 10 years, or Northeast. What has really struck me is that travel as a theme is thankfully now growing now, because earlier you could travel, but you had nowhere to showcase your experience. And now that there is the internet, there is the Facebook and the blogs, there are a million travel writers out there, and the way they can send pictures right away and write something about them. But travel as a theme has been really underplayed in India, and the joy of travel, purposeless travel, really has not been encouraged by families, as a culture. So there is my young cousin who I draw great inspiration from. He's in his early 20s. He lives in Noida, and he went right up to Bhutan on his own with barely any money, and just backpacking his way, finding friends, going to restaurants, striking up conversations. It would have changed his life. So the idea that travel changes your life and enriches you as a person, I think has not been realized so much in our country as it has been perhaps in many other countries. And that and the idea of individuality, the idea of letting people go on their own and discover things, that has also not been nurtured so much. And I feel that now things, it's a romantic notion for all of us. I have always wanted to have this fakir-like existence and travel to strange lands and write about things. But somewhere it has been seen until recently as an oddity, as the guy who's moving out of a structured life and going off on a bike journey into Leh or what. So I feel that the joy of travel and the fact that it's not just a luxury that the fact that it's changing people as people. I mean, my strength, if I have some strengths, is not knowledge. It's only experience. The fact is that I have met hundreds and hundreds of people out there, and they somewhere reflect in whether when I'm writing stories for radio, or I'm writing a film script, or even in my reportage as a journalist. These are real people. A lot of real people and experiences and moments seep through. They give us the sense of humility to understand the other point of view. So when you're in Kashmir and you're from the mainland, quote unquote, and there is a point of view which is not palatable to a lot of people back home for you, but that sense of humility to understand that point of view, and that sense of proportion, to be able to straddle both sides, and that the fact that people's points of view emerge from who they are and where they were born and which communities they grew up in. So to me, travel writing then becomes a much larger adventure, which should be aggressively and ruthlessly encouraged at a time, especially today, when we are becoming so clinical, so cubicle. We are moving with this little cubicle in our hands all the time, and while we think we are making these journeys, and mentally we are, but I think to be able to go there, meet new people, and experience the fragrance and the richness and the conversations is really important for our generation today, the youth of today, to evolve as people and become better people.
Yeah, thank you, Neelesh. One of the points you had mentioned earlier was about, you said that we are sort of stuck with these cubicles we are carrying in our hands, and I like to that a lot, especially in your field of journalism, there is this tendency to sort of do travel-ish kind of reportage without traveling. And we'll come back to that. I think that needs a little bit of exploration. And I want to ask Zach about something. And Zach is a man who wears many hats, not at the same time though. And he's a crime fiction writer, and he's written 4 books of travel in Swedish. And I wanted to ask him, like, is there a different approach you take to travel writing of whatever place, depending on whether you're writing for an Indian audience, some of your pieces are for Outlook Traveler and so on, or whether you're writing for a Swedish edition. For example, he has written a book on ashram hopping. I don't think that's primarily, it has a certain kind of appeal to a certain kind of audience. So I want to know if you sort of have a different approach.
I don't think there's much of a difference in the approach, basically because a travel story is a travel story. I mean, depending on, of course, where it's published, like suppose I write something on India for a foreign reader, one would have to explain what an idli is, or a masala dosa or something like that, because they wouldn't otherwise understand it. Whereas for an Indian reader, you of course don't have to explain these things. So those differences are very minor in a sense. But then on the
what would you have to explain to an Indian audience? Like the equivalent of Italy for an Indian audience which you need to explain.
In a foreign country like that. Well, that might be something like, actually I wrote a story for Forbes magazine from China about Chinese fusion food. There was one interesting thing that happened there, because I was, when I go somewhere, I try to make friends with local people, because they'll show the best things about a particular place, and things that you wouldn't even think of doing on your own, because only locals do those local things. So there was this artist in Shanghai. He took me to one of his favorite restaurants, and we were gonna eat some of the special things that you wouldn't be eating unless you knew where to look for these things. So we went to this restaurant, and we had this kind of dim sum thing, and then he said, now the best thing is gonna come, and it's called kanji. Because you may not know it, but I live here in South India in Bangalore. So when I saw this kanji coming, they spell it C-O-N-G-E-E, but it's exactly similar to the kanji, the K and J-I, how it's spelled here. So it was this sort of porridge type of thing, which had, I think, either prawns or pork in it, which was the only difference to a typical South Indian kanji. And so he was sort of in raptures over this thing, and he was like trying to explain to me the significance of, and for me it became a very interesting thing because then I'm writing this story for an Indian publication, and I come all the way from South India to Shanghai to be fed kanji by this artist. And kanji is something like, I think in Kerala they eat it if they're sick or something, you know, like,
Even in Tamil Nadu.
Yeah, in Tamil Nadu. So that became like a very interesting, then I made the whole story about this kind of thing, like how is it possible that this kanji has come to Shanghai, and then I discovered that, you know, a long time ago there was some Chinese admiral, because this kanji is very popular there in this coastal cities in particular, like Canton and Shanghai. So I discovered that there was a Chinese admiral who had sailed to, he was a Chinese Muslim who had sailed to, I think, all the way to Mecca, and passed through Kerala on the way, I think around 15th century. And maybe due to him they have those Chinese fishing nets in Kerala, because he had a fleet with some 50 or 60,000 sailors with him. And they spent some time in Tamil Nadu and some time in Kerala. And so some of these Chinese may have stayed back there and started building these fishing nets, and also got, you know, addicted to kanji, which they may have then brought back with them to Canton, and from where it spread along the Chinese coast. So, I mean, trying to just explain this kind of strange culinary habit became, in a way, the backbone of the whole story. And that is only possible because, I mean, I couldn't write that kind of story for a Swedish reader, because they will be like, what, porridge? I mean, what's the point? So they eat the same porridge in South India as in the Chinese coastal city. But like for me, it became like really interesting exploration, you know, like one of those things, you know, where you somewhere in the world and you suddenly realize, wow, these, you know, connections go way back. Like, long before we were flying to each other's countries, people were exchanging recipes.
One of this, see, especially when you're talking about this kanji business, you probably had a lot of inputs from the restaurant who was serving you, and you probably did a little bit of historical research. And these are all elements which go into making your narrative rich, you know, which sort of raises the question of, again, the whole point I have in my mind about the approach. Like Suli, coming to you going with, I've read little bit some of your pieces, and there is a lot of importance you give to detail, and terrific amount of detail, and but yet you are not someone who follows the journalistic approach like Neelesh would do. So there is this two kinds of approaches which, I mean, most travel writers could be fitted into one or the other. One is the eyewitness reporter kind of an approach. The other is more of a participant character. You know, Paul Theroux, for example, is, and he's like, mostly his character. He himself is a primary mover in his work and so on. So how do you approach? Are you more into, you know, the camera work kind of a presentation, or you yourself become a character in your narratives?
Well, the ironic thing is that everyone tells me that it is detailed, but this is where the irony comes in. I don't jot down any notes. I don't do any kind of reportage that is at all journalistic. I go by feel. I don't even take.
You don't do any total recall conversations.
I do, but it's what I feel. I don't write notes. I don't even take a camera with me. And when I do take a camera with me, I forget. Because, you know, while you're fumbling with your camera, you're missing out. I think a camera is a horrible thing.
I agree.
Oh, I'm so sorry. When we travel, traveling, no, I love the camera. I love the camera in this setting. But when I travel, a camera stops me. A camera is used to record something for you to remember in the future, and this thing which you can fully experience right now. And I feel that while I'm fumbling with the camera, I would be missing something that is happening right in front of me, which I can absorb there and then and be a part of. And the detail is because of how I feel about a certain place, and I use the descriptive writing to describe what basically stems from a feeling. And going back to what we were talking about just now, and this is also connected to detail, is the purposeless sort of travel. I feel that it's very, very important nowadays. If you look at the evolution of travel in the past, people traveled because they were adventurous. They were in search of gold or spice or whatever it was, but they were adventurous. And then later we had tour groups, so that people who worked very hard for their living would just go on a very easygoing, well, I wouldn't say it's easygoing because I don't like that sort of thing, but to a lot of people it's easy to see 7 countries in 2 weeks, for example. And then now we have the keyboard traveler, the armchair traveler, where just a like button will get you places. And I think the danger of that is that we are constricted to only what we like and what we know. For example, when a social website detects your likes, they will then recommend you things that are things related to what you like, which then keeps you in a comfort zone. I like purposeless travel because it takes me outside of my comfort zone, and that is where, and this is something I'm really hooked on, and that is where my perceptions, my long-held perceptions of what is of beauty, ugliness, wealth, poverty, success and failure completely fall apart. And they fall apart again and again and again, until a time where you think, I give up. I don't have any opinions. I just feel for, whatever, I just feel for whatever my traveling takes me. And one really good example of going out of my comfort zone was that I did kind of plan to see the Taj Mahal. So on my way
Had you planned to learn Odyssey as well? Was it all part of
No, it's totally unplanned. Okay, that's the Noida story, where I took 3 months to travel around India. That was my second trip in India, because the first one got me hooked already. So the second trip, I arrived in the middle of the night, and I'm sure all of you will know that an auto driver would say, "Oh yes, madam, and I know. You said no problem, madam." He said, "Sorry about my attempt at Hindi accent, but it doesn't work any other way." So he said, "No problem, madam. You said I take good care of you. You are a visitor in my country." So I gave him this address of a homestay, because 3 months I can't afford a hotel. So I thought, okay, are you for real? But he assured me that he knew where. No problem. No, you said. So I said, and 5 minutes later, I'm sure all of you can guess what happened. It is. I'm so sorry, madam. The address is incomplete. I will take you to a very good hotel. I said, I don't want a hotel. I want to get here. You said okay, and that argument went on for half an hour. So. But obviously he just didn't know where that place was. So I ended up in a hotel, and I saw I saw a stack of leaflets of Jyoti Srivastava and Odissi, a very famous international Odissi dancer. And before that, I had been interested in Bharatanatyam and Odissi, but I felt so much more for Odissi that I had done some research on it online. So when I saw Jyoti, I thought, I know her. Well, I know her from her website. So I called her, and she said, you come to Noida, and we will see what I can plan for you. And I thought, okay, I'm homeless anyway, and I don't know where I'm heading, so I might as well just go and see what this lady can, see what it's all about. And then she gave me lunch, and in the course of just 2 chapatis and some dal, I wouldn't even say she convinced me. I just drifted into her plan of doing Odissi dance for the next 2.5 months.
That's not knowing where you are headed taken to its logical conclusion.
Can I add something on this? talking about cameras. You know, I feel it's not that I want you to take.
I was going to ask you.
No, but I feel, you know, it's really important if you want to become a good travel writer to have a camera and always carry it with you. I mean, I am sorry I have to disagree with that point, because I find in many circumstances that if I'm writing about a place and I may end up writing my story, you know, like a month later or 2 months later, and I can get stuck on things like, was that wall of that house blue or was it red? And I can't like ask my feelings. Do I feel it was blue or do I feel it was red? I have to know what kind of thing it is, or any other particular detail of a room where I spent time or something like that. So, and then the photos are really important because you can go back and exactly, like without having to have any form of, like my memory is terribly bad, I have no like total recall or anything like that. But then the photos and the recordings that one can do, like on the mobile phone you can record conversations. You can actually go back and check details like what was that particular expression, what was that particular thing on the windowsill, what was that on that shelf in that building. And I feel these kind of details are really important. And maybe it doesn't matter, you know, because none of you who read me will actually travel there and check whether that thing was there, whether that wall was blue or red. And you would trust me even if I said it was a yellow wall, because you. But still, when in the process of writing, I feel it's really important, and I can, and sometimes I can kind of get caught halfway through a story, just not being able to remember some particular detail. And just Googling for it is like really difficult because it's very unlikely that you'll find photos. So a camera is really important, but one doesn't have to have one of those big cameras where you have to do a lot of things. Like I carry a very small credit card size camera.
So you can manage the cell phone. Why do you need a camera?
No, but like with a real camera, you can get like sharper pictures. You can actually sell them to magazines and some, even though it's like one of those credit card size cameras. And also, one of those cameras are very handy because you can keep them in your hand. You can even take photos in places where you're not supposed to take photos, which is also, then you'll be the only travel writer with photo evidence. Or like if you're in a, say like in a violent situation, like a riot thing, like where it's not good to walk around with a big camera because they might start rioting against you, you know, instead of whatever they're rioting against. But if you have that small camera and you hold it like that, click, and slide, you can get like really good photos of things. So this is like a tip for those of you who maybe plan to become travel writers. When you think about what kind of camera to get, consider those.
No, I would.
This is why this panel is well put together, because we have different styles. We have different purposes and objectives, and your detail is more realistic, and my detail is more into, I don't know, my travel writing is, I wouldn't say it's fiction, because the spirit of the stories, I'm true to the spirit of the stories, but whether the wall is blue or red depends on how I felt.
Yeah, that's a good point actually, because I was going to tell you why I was going to disagree with your disagreement with her, because camera is useful as a device for documentation, okay? And I would ask you write for these magazines, they should send a photographer with you to do that job for you instead of expecting you to photograph and write also, because I feel memory is a very important component of travel writing. If you've seen a particular wall which is blue, okay, it might have registered a certain blue in your brain because of the sunlight or whatever, and your camera will not register the same blue which your mind did, And if you are a certain kind of writer, you might be more interested in the blue registered by your brain rather than going to the camera because you've forgotten what the blue looked like and then referring to the camera to see what blue it was and then reproducing it in your writing. So I would still say that the camera is okay up to a point, but to have it as a fallback is, I think, not something I would be comfortable with.
I think for me it's also a very practical matter because my memory is so bad. So that
as bad as my sense of direction is.
Possibly like that. And sometimes, because also I'm also a fiction writer, so sometimes like if I go with my feelings too much, then I'll go into complete fiction. And if I see a riot with 20 people in my fictionalized version, it's like 20,000 people that I single-handedly walk off with my camera.
So you can't count also added to your...
No, I can count them when they are there, but afterwards when I'm writing the story, maybe there were 45, it would be more dangerous. Maybe there were 90 of them chasing me. But with the camera, I checked that no, there were actually only 3. They were not even looking at me. But it's like different, like how you work with your writing. And I like using all kinds of tools like cameras, computers, this kind of GPS and whatever. Just like, I feel comfortable with that.
I want to disagree with your disagreement with his disagreement.
I'm looking forward to
you. I think the difference here is who are you writing for, and there is a word in Hindi, swanta sukhai, for the joy of your inner self, and which is what I feel what she is doing, and she is the protagonist of that story. Whereas to me, he is taking that reader to that place. So the reader is the protagonist of that story. And I am obsessive about detail. I do take a camera with me, but I often take just random pictures because I want to remember that blue wall. And not just that, I want to remember the frame on that wall and what picture it had.
Yes,
because those visual journeys, these are the visual journeys that you're taking your reader to. Whereas with her, and this is equally exciting and enriching as a reader, that you're traveling with her, whereas he's taking the reader to that place. So I think that's the difference in approach. And these are both very interesting forms.
I wonder, could it be some gender thing, some kind of male way of traveling? What do you think?
No, I don't think it's to do with gender because
Are we about to create a controversy at the fag end of this discussion?
Yeah, I don't want questions raised about my gender because of the way I like to travel.
No, he's probably right. It is most probably a gender thing because when
I don't
I'm
think so.
in control. If I want you to see that wall as red, you will see that wall as red.
That's not a gender thing, I'm sorry, I want to repeat it.
What's your favorite color?
Pink.
That's my case.
Neelesh, we were having this discussion earlier, and I wanted him to talk about how travel, ironically, is receding from the domain of journalism, which is a very worrying thing. So, how do you see that happening?
See, a lot of opinions we have about people and places and issues are based on us, the intermediaries, who are supposed to earnestly and honestly capture those emotions and bring them to our audience. I feel that one of the biggest crises of reportage in this country today is that in the news media space, and I just don't mean covering the riot, I would also mean, talking to the shikara owner in Kashmir who dislikes the Indian state but is dependent on the Indian tourist and waits for him or her. And I want that nuanced point of view. Now, so what's happening is that with the shrinking of travel budgets, and it started, I think, to me, if there's a notional milestone, slightly before the recession set in India, and that became an excuse for media outlets to stop sending out journalists out there. Alongside, over the last decade or so, there's been a great boom in television news media. And since that happened, we look at the 10 TV sets in the newsroom and kid ourselves into arrogantly believing that that's what happened in this humongous country today, and if you have that, then you're covered. But that's not so, because it is actually the print media which for the longest time led the creative agenda in the news space. Newspapers like the Indian Express, for example, or the Hindu have, to their credit, greatly encouraged this sort of reportage and this sort of writing. But because we stopped going out there, I think we stopped, because we stopped going out there, we stopped getting to know what's happening out there. And because we stopped getting to know what's happening out there, our opinions about people in different parts of our country became skewed and narrow and blinkered. And I think it's really important. So for Gaon Connection, we have a separate session at 12, so I'm not going to talk too much about it right now. But we just sent a reporter on a 1,000-kilometer travel across rural UP to write about sugarcane farmers. It will change him as a person. He's joined journalism 2 years ago, and we just threw him, just go out there. And B, it brings to a lot, to even us to begin with, as the sort of the platform owners of content, new points of view which we didn't know in that very restricted newsroom with our knowledge. So I feel that travel to bring in more reportage, whether it is for joy of travel, whether it is the opinions of people, just writing out of. I wrote a piece from Imphal once, which was a travel piece, and wherein a lot of me came in, and I was able to write about. But I wrote about the place. I wrote about some people I met, and I thought that told the readers of the Hindustan Times, where I was the deputy executive editor then, a lot more than, because nobody goes to these places, nobody writes these things. So I feel that the purposeless travel, the opinionless travel also needs to be very ruthlessly encouraged, and it is a space that's been elbowed out. It's something that's been elbowed out of the Indian media space, and it would be really a great service if it could come back.
Yeah, I think it's a very fascinating kind of dichotomy between travel journalism and its problems, and travel as exploration, travel as adventure. Me and Zach, and we have done a lot of that as well. You can talk about this some more, but not right now, because I've been told we have to wrap it up. So I just invite questions from the audience here.
This is for Suli. See, you spoke about writing with feelings. From my experience, I find that when I go somewhere and I know that I will be writing about it, that has already, changed my mind and my experience, because that thing is there at the back of my mind that I'm going to be writing about this. Whereas my experience of a place, if I just go there and just soak it in and I'm not going to write about it, this is like just a different experience. So, where does that figure at all? I mean, do you think about that?
I actually don't think about, I don't think about I just go. I go with a very open mind. I don't think I had any opinion about a place before I visited the place. And this is why when I say that I write purely from feelings, that's why the feelings are a lot more pure than if I had already formed an opinion or that I had expectations.
I mean, when you're in a place, you know that you're going to write about it, as opposed to being in a place just for the sake of being there.
Yeah, I go to a place just for the sake of being there. I actually don't know if I'm going to write about it or not. There are many places I've been to that I haven't written about. But maybe one day the desire to write about it will come when the time is right. So that's how I do it. I don't really have a plan because I'm not a full-time travel writer. I still need my day job. So travel writing is purely for the love of it. So I'm not pressured to do my next piece.
So you decide later whether you will write.
Yes, yes. See, my first trip to India was in the 80s. No. Was in the early 90s. But it wasn't really it wasn't real traveling because I stayed with an expat. So obviously it was in a lovely bungalow and everything. But something about India just struck my heart. And I only went back 10 years later because for some reason things didn't work out. I went there 10 years later, and then the story was written a few years later. So it all depends on whether the time is right or not, and whether the country actually wants to be written or not at that particular time. I know it sounds really airy-fairy, it's a gender thing.
Yeah, I'll just ask it. No, it's not a question. Actually, I'm saying you are elder, but when people go out, like children, they try to ask them the question. Where have you been in the holidays and you write about it? I'm just saying, like school, when we get to know about travel writing as children. But now when the sir was talking about sugarcane fields, when people are using satellite imageries to look out the total water drainage and the availability of the sugar, where the water is better, they get better price for the crystals. It's not part of, but of course travel writing is a very important thing as the present generation, because people can get to know about the places where they have not reached earlier. So I think in women's era and all that, we get small pages which is written about it. I think it's one of a quite important way of writing, I suppose. I'm not talking anything more. I'm not saying anything. So how do you get these O'Hara names? O'Hara, what's your name?
His name is not O'Hara.
Something.
You think of Scarlett O'Hara. She's in a different O'Hara. Actually, I started working in a pop group when I was very young. On the records, it was better than But I'd like to point out, regarding what you were just saying, that one of the most important things that I feel, about travel writing is that a good piece of travel writing should always have a story, like a narrative. You're not just, it's not just a matter of exploration of a place, but like when you're there in that place, you should, as a writer, you will be looking for like what story can be interesting to tell from this place, to the readers. And that's also what it makes it more interesting for readers to read travel writing, because they'll read a story about something that they may not have ever, something that may never have come to their minds to think about. That story that you can convey through a very good travel writing can, actually change people's perceptions of the world and things like that. And so, so I'm saying this just like, because there are, of course, the kind of travel writing that surveys, sugarcane production or something like that, or water and these things. But the travel writing that is closer to my heart, especially, is the one that always searches for interesting stories to tell about particular places.
I have
Time for one more question.
My question is for Neelesh.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
When you write and talk to people in the northeast and Kashmir, they have very intense and deep feelings about things which we in the mainland don't really consider them at all. So how do you achieve what you said as opinionless report on that?
I feel that whenever conflict happens, the first casualty is not a human being, but a sense of proportion. So if you were to look at the journalists or writers on two sides of the Banihal tunnel in Kashmir and in North India or Delhi, somehow they've not been able to straddle the sense of proportion that you require to sensitively write about lands that have not been written about, lands that have angst which is based on issues which you might not understand, but which they rationalize and understand very well. So I feel that if there is a sense of humility in coming down to the level of the subjects of your conversations. I have a lot of conversations. I often, sit around aimlessly at tea shops. I feel that to become a good writer, it's no rocket science, but you have to be a good observer and a good listener. And so I can hear a stranger on a park bench for an hour. I could have not been talking today and just listening to these people because they have fascinating things to say. But so that skill to be able to hear with humility what people have to say, I think will bring, and to then write it impactfully, because you might have just witnessed a fascinating story, but you really don't have the wherewithal to capture it for your audience, because I want to see that blue wall. And so those visual journeys, because you're the ambassador for the rest of the world in that village or that town or that highway, so I feel that those are really important. And if we're going out there, we know not to ask dumb questions, not to disrespect local cultures. I've had places where people offered me water which I suspected was not pure, but I had it because out of respect for that person who was having it every day, and I risked my gut, but that was required at that moment. So I think that level of becoming one with the geography and one with the people is required, and which will make you a far better writer, which will bring in the little nuances, the little, the touch of a local proverb, a little, garnishing of some local folktale, which will really create these and conjure these images for us.
Thank you, Neelesh. I don't think we have time. Okay, one more question.
I know we are running short of time, but I just thought, Zach, I just wanted to ask you about the bit you wrote about Majestic, our good old Majestic in Bangalore, in this book. And I thought that is a completely new genre of travel writing, because as a travel writer, sometimes you look for the exotic, unseen, but here is a part of the city that you pass by every morning, or every other day. It's a heart of the city. And to actually discover that in the uncelebrated part of Bangalore. So was that like something that just you consciously looked out for? No one, I think, has written such a delicious piece about Majestic, really.
You mean the piece that was in the anthology?
Penguin anthology? That one. And all the, very usefully, all the sidey places of the haunts.
Well, actually that area, has been very close to my heart for a long time, because first time I came to Bangalore as a tourist more than 20 years ago, that was the first part of Bangalore which I actually entered through, because it's near the railway station and a bus station, so you automatically land up in Majestic. And I ended up spending quite a long time there, and I checked into a very seedy hotel where the rooms were like 67 rupees per night, and no hot water and things like that. And I spent a month there, and quite happily, without realizing that wasn't actually the center of Bangalore. It gradually understood that there was something called Empty Road, and where all the normal people were. So for me, and ever since then, whenever I return to that area, because as one travels by train or something, one usually passes through, it struck me how I have a very nostalgic relationship to that area. So in a sense, that piece about the Majestic area was like an ode or like a love poem to a place, because I realized, the more I interacted with people in Bangalore, that actually that area was seen as a bad area, and I really would warn you that don't spend too much time there, because bad things might happen to you. So, and also for a naughty person like myself, if people say don't spend time there, of course I have to spend more and more time there. So in fact, my latest novel, Mr. Majestic, is set in that area, and where I try to make full use of the Majestic area for a fictional project. But even then, the novel uses some of my travel writing skills as well. The city as a geography which you can explore through a detective mystery type of story.
I think that's a very good note to wrap up the session on. Zach has got a brilliant travel story just a few kilometers from his home, and I think essentially that is what good travel writing should aim to, and all who wants to get into it should strive to bring out, which is good stories. And of course, we have to make one important decision for every travel narrative they launch into, which is whether the wall should be blue or it should be red. That will determine the tonality and what kind of travel stories they come up with. Thank you for
I request the panelists to please thank the BLF board. For further interaction with the authors and for book signing, please proceed to the book signing area. Documentaries are being screened. Since this edition is dedicated to the memory of late Sri Dr. U.R. Ananthamurthy, do visit a photo exhibition on him in the cafeteria.
Wine and soft drinks. Call 080-4047-7777 for your prescription.
Times of India presents 6th edition of Times Auto Show. Be present to witness the first ever custom car and bike show. Only at White Orchid, Manyata Tech Park, ORR, Hebbal. 26th to 28th September 2014. Between 10:30 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. Presenting sponsor Clarion. Powered by Race Dynamics.
सर, हमारे ऑफिस में साड़ी डे कब है?
जी ऐसा कोई प्लान नहीं है।
उफ, ये कैसा ऑफिस है? बैंगलोर